There we go. So I can't tell you how honored I am to be back again to speak with each and every one of you on probably to one of the most important constituencies within all of our Orthodox churches, and that's the leadership that exists within our parishes. And you're going to hear something in a second that will be sounding controversial, but that actually will be meant to inspire you in the role that you're trying to accomplish. One of the things that I really love is this notion that you don't have to feel responsible to change the entire world, but you can. In fact, you're called to change somebody's world, and that's the world of the people, the parishioners that are charged in your or under your charge as a leader, whether you're a parish council president or a parish council member, ministry leader, or clergy, right? So our job is to really start to focus back to what Father Ted was talking about, the relational aspect about how we could change somebody's world. Now, as Alex mentioned, in my doctoral dissertation, I'm going to refer to it in just a second because it's a free resource that I'm making available to you. But in the section on leadership, which is the very first module in there, I started with something that sounded very controversial. It's the conclusion that every parish problem is a leadership problem. And I go on to say, if you think you have a problem other than leadership, then think again. And that sounds very harsh, because people will say, yeah, but there's a lot of things that are out of our control. And of course, that's true. But what is in your control is the ability as a leader to create the right teams and the right contingency plans. So when those events that otherwise seem out of your control occur, you are back in control. And the best example we can use of that is during the COVID period. As soon as every one of the churches were forced to be closed down, that's another conversation for another day. But my phone started ringing off the hook from clergy that were saying, "What do we do? What do we do? What do we do?" And you know who I never heard from? I never heard from some of the parishes, for example, in Florida. Now, why is that? Because they're used to having hurricanes coming through there and closing their church down, which meant they had contingency plans for what happened if people couldn't get to the church. And all they had to do was reach into those binders and start to execute the plan. So when we talk about the role of leaders, one of the responsibilities of the leader is to constantly be scanning the horizon, looking for the future, to develop strategies to deal with the issues that are going to come up. So a couple of pieces of other folks that have commented in terms of this responsibility of looking to the future. We can go back to one of our early, Greek ancestors who said there's nothing permanent except change. And we've seen that in our daily lives. On the Chinese side of great wisdom was the concept that said, if you do not change direction, you may end up where you're heading. And that's kind of a cute way of saying, listen, if you're not sure you're headed in the right direction, you may get there and it may not be where you want to be. And even Winston Churchill famously said, to improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often. And so one of the things that we struggle with oftentimes is the reluctance, the inhibitions that we have on change. And yet that's what we need to be driving ourselves into the comfort zone of being able to do. Let's look at three different statements from someone who's reputed to be one of the smartest people in the world, Mr. Albert Einstein. And I always want to introduce Albert Einstein. I always like to say Mr. Albert Einstein because of the great anecdote of when he first met the Reverend Billy Graham before he passed away. And he was introduced to Reverend Billy Graham as Mr. Albert Einstein. And the Reverend Graham said, "Aren't you Dr. Einstein?" And Albert Einstein responded, "I do not have a PhD because no one is qualified to give me one." Now, that may sound like arrogance, and in some sense, perhaps it is, but it is a reflection of the extreme role of leadership that he played in so much of the thought. But what he said, and I just love this expression, he goes, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by their ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And so what we're starting to listen and understand from this is the notion that within everyone you have the opportunity to lead in your parishes. You have the opportunity to bring forth the great resources and gifts that God has given them. And indeed, that is what St. John Chrysostom is going to remind us is your responsibility as a leader. Albert Einstein went on to say that the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. Only those people that are so locked into one and only one strategy are the ones that are not demonstrating intelligence and the flexibility to consider new ideas. And I'm going to be challenging you real hard, particularly as we get to the end of this leadership program. The third thing that he said, and I really love this, is that logic will get you from A to B. imagination will take you everywhere. And so as you start to think about your role as a leader and thinking about what's going on and what the future may look like, don't be afraid to be imaginative. Don't be afraid to be creative. Don't be afraid to try new things and to experiment with new things, because it's in that experimentation that you're really going to start to realize the full resources and capacities and abilities, and frankly, some better ways to do things. The current gurus of management right now are Jim Kouzes and Mary Posner, and they basically said that the domain of the leader, that's you, is the future. And the work of the leader is change. And so I'm starting very hard and strong on this concept, because all too often our leaders tend to think that their job is to just maintain the status quo and keep things going the way they've always been going. No, that is the job of the managers of your parish, of which you may serve in some managerial roles. But as the leaders of the parish, whether you're the priest, whether you're on the parish council, whether you're running a ministry, your job is to always be looking to the future and figure out what can we change to make it better the next time. You can celebrate successes, but in the meantime, we want to be focused on how do we drive change within our organizations, our parishes, our ministries, whatever we may be doing. Now, in the interest of trying to do something new from the last couple times that we've done this, as Alex alluded to, I finally finished a long haul to get my doctorate in strategic leadership, primarily focused on Christian organizations, and ended up trying to write my dissertation, which ended up being a book about what are the three biggest challenges that are facing all of our churches, do all the empirical research, and find the best practices and be able to give it to you so that you have something going forward. So I will be referring to this periodically through the entire program. The name of the book is A Roadmap for American Churches and People of Faith, WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? It's split up into multiple different segments. What we're going to be focusing on is the segment on leadership best practices. But if you're interested, there's a separate chapter on strategic planning. For those of you that may be involved in stewardship and engagement ministry, there's 3 chapters there. For if you're involved in spiritual formation, religious education, there's 3 chapters there. And if you really want to challenge yourself and start to focus on Christian unity, that's the last part of the book. It is available to you for free forever. You can download it off my website. You can hit that QR code and it'll open it up for you, and you can download it and do whatever you want to with it and look at it. The only thing I will caution you, because I've gotten criticized by some friends, is if you do download it and you hit print, be careful, because it's 626 pages long. So make sure you have plenty of paper and ink cartridges going. What we're going to be focusing on tonight is primarily a really quick condensation of chapters 3 through 5 and 8, which is focusing on leadership best practices, and then just a quick little touch on the strategic planning that was pioneered in the metropolis of Boston and that has been so well executed by some of the parishes. And I know Alex and Don and some of the others are continuing to lead in that effort. So we want to make sure that you understand those resources are all available to you. And just in case you want, this entire presentation deck has already been uploaded on my website. It's all free, so there's no clickbait on it. But if you go to Stewardship Calling and you go to the Keynotes and Leadership tab, right underneath there, the first thing you'll see is leadership, and the first presentation that you'll see is this presentation deck. Or you can hit that QR code and it'll take you directly to that. But I just want to make sure that this resource will be available to you in case you find something that will be of interest to you, and maybe I went through it too quickly for you. So the agenda that we're going to cover tonight is quite aggressive in some respects. We're really going to be focusing on 6 critical elements, 5 that are well established, and then the 6th one to get you really starting to think about the future and change when we start to look at how artificial intelligence can be used positively within our churches. So let's start at the beginning, which is most important. What does it take, and how can we become better servant leaders? And that's a phrase you'll hear, because that is indeed the quintessential example of leadership that we've established. Now, there's no better example of this than our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who was the most visible, most famous, and most incredible servant leader of all times. I use this icon, and it's a story with which you're familiar. Obviously, it's the washing of the feet of the apostles. But what I say all the time is that when you're understanding Scripture, when you're reading Scripture, unless you understand the context of the story, you may not fully appreciate its significance. See, if I said, washing feet, you kind of think of, well, that's nice, but it's not the biggest deal in the world because most of us take showers or baths and most of us wear socks and most of us wear shoes. But in those days, they did not. They would go for days, sometimes even weeks, with open-toed sandals, walking in dirt and mud. So after this long journey to get to this place, when the Lord went on his knees and took the water to wash their feet were caked with dirt and mud and filth. And so now you can start to understand better why the apostles were a little bit taken aback that the Lord would submit himself in that act of humility to do that. But in doing that, he gave us a wonderful visual image about what does it mean to be a servant leader. And for decades and decades and decades, people wondered, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And then finally, in the 1970s, a professor at a university, Dr. Robert Greenleaf, spent his entire career establishing in kind of more modern terms for us to be able to apply what are the elements of servant leadership. And Dr. Spears, about 30 years later, took it and expanded it even further. Let's look quickly at the 10 elements that Dr. Greenleaf established that has been long discussed by many, many scholars to identify the most quintessential servant leaders. And as I quickly describe these, I want you to go through a personal self-assessment. Am I actually fulfilling that which I'm capable of doing in the context of these requirements? So the first element that Robert Greenleaf identified for servant leadership is the ability to listen. And to listen actively, which is to say, literally throw yourself into listening aggressively so that you hear everything they say in the way they say it. But it's not just listening to anything, it's actually making sure that you're also listening to different perspectives and then reflecting on everything that you hear before you open your mouth. I mean, we always joke about the fact that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we would listen twice as much as we would talk. So one of the first elements of your being an effective servant leader is your ability to listen. The second element is empathy. Can you understand what the other person is saying, what they're going through, what their circumstances are? Can you relate to it? Now, that's oftentimes very hard if you're in a very different position than the person that you are leading. But the most effective leaders of all are those that find a way to, with great empathy, engage and try to understand. And empathy goes hand in glove with listening, because it's kind of hard to be empathetic to someone if you haven't really heard and listened aggressively what they said and asking them the questions that you need to know so that you can really understand where they're coming from. The third criterion that he'd identified for servant leadership is healing. Can you take someone who's dealing with whatever challenge they're dealing with and help them overcome that challenge? And that's why I go back to that opening quote where I said that every problem in a parish is actually a leadership problem, because what it demonstrates is that the leaders weren't able to help the individuals or the ministries or the organization overcome that challenge. So in the act of being a great servant leader, your job is not to go around and shout out instructions and whatnot, but to actually help the individuals you're leading overcome whatever challenges are facing them. The fourth element, as we start to now broaden our perspective, is awareness. Let's not only look at what's going on internally within our parishes and our ministries, but let's make sure we're looking at what's going on in the world around us. And that's also going to help with the empathy aspect of it, because if we understand some of the unique challenges that young people are going through today, we'll have a better and more insightful way to lead them in a more impactful manner. The fifth element is when we finally come to something that people have historically thought about when they think about leaders. They think of leaders as being these dynamic people that are persuasive. But what Dr. Greenleaf focused on is that the persuasion comes from convincing rather than subjugating. In other words, he was actually introducing a concept which is orthodox in its truth and foundation, we're going to talk about briefly later, and that is, how do we build a consensus? How do we get people to agree that this is what we ought to be doing, rather than me imposing upon them as if I'm some dynamic leader? And so the element of leadership is not imposing your will or what you want, but to get everyone to come along with this idea of whatever it is that the group collectively decides, because that way then the group will lead together to achieve whatever result you set out to accomplish. The sixth one is kind of a complex word. He talks about conceptualization. We can actually narrow that or make that a little bit easier to understand, and that's casting a vision. Where is our parish going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 years? Where's our ministry going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 years? How can we cast a vision forward and then actually create a pathway so that people can achieve that vision? Seventh flows from 6, and that is we have to have foresight. We have to look at our past history, but not be so wound up around our past history that we fail to learn the lessons from it that we are going to apply to future circumstances. And not so wound up in our past history that we use that to limit what's available to us in the future. I mean, let's be honest, if we were just limited by what we had in past history, we wouldn't even be using Zoom right now. We would be using quill pens maybe and things of that nature. And so the idea is to learn from history, but to look at it only as a vehicle to be able to convince ourselves that we have a greater insight of what the future looks like and how we can effectively change it. Eighth, and something that we're very cognizant of in the Orthodox Church, is the obligation of stewardship. The willingness and the engagement to help others, to serve others, to use the gifts that we have been given, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others, to take all of the gifts that God gave us, of which we are stewards, and to deploy them effectively in the groups that we lead. That leads us to number 9. The greatest servant leaders are those that are helping focus on growing the individuals they lead, not just telling them what to do and helping them execute, but make sure that they're growing them. In other words, one of the ways you can tell an effective leader is if, God forbid, they died tomorrow, we jokingly say if they got run over by a bus tomorrow, would the organization stop or would it carry forward? And the best leaders are the ones that have grown the individual team members so that their absence doesn't retard the growth and expansion of the ministry. And the 10th element, and an element that is so fundamental to those of us within the Orthodox Church, is building a community, creating an organization, a community, a world around us that is consistent with the values that we're trying to do. So these are the 10 elements that Dr. Greenleaf spent a whole career developing and others have built on. And I strongly recommend his book. But about 30 years ago, when I started down the servant leadership road and was first confronted with some of his work, I said, gosh, everything he's talking about is really great, but is there a more easier way to try and simplify this with just an Orthodox perspective associated with it? So I was able to kind of narrow it down to 6 building blocks. And I would encourage you to think about these 6 building blocks. And I'm going to give you a little quiz at the end here so you can assess your own servant leadership capabilities. So the first and most foundational leadership characteristic within the Orthodox Church, whether you're a priest, parish council member, parish council officer, ministry leader, is love. If you don't share love, if you don't extend love, you will never receive love and you will never be the most effective leader you can possibly be. Love is truly foundational. It's the reason why our Lord created it in what we call the Great Commandment that he offered at the end of his ministry, defined in John 13, 34, 35, when he said, "A new commandment I give you." And again, to understand the context of Scripture, only God could give commandments in those days. Men could pass laws and regulations. And so when the Lord said, "A new commandment I gave you," he was reaffirming himself as a creator, as co-equal with God. And he said that you love one another. It is foundational to everything we do. And I will tell you, it's foundational in your ministry, whether you're a priest or a parish leader. I'll never forget a priest that I was working with who came into a parish that had been dealing with some tumultuous situations. And he was a very wise priest. And I said, "What's your strategy for the first 3 months going to be?" He said, "I'm going to meet everybody I can and I'm just going to love them." I said, "That's a great idea. Then what are you going to do?" He said, "Well, for the next 3 months, I'm going to meet everybody and I'm going to love them." I said, "Okay, that's a good 6-month start. What are you going to do 1 year later?" He said, "I'm going to meet everybody and I'm going to love them." And I said, "You got anything else in your repertoire other than love?" And he said, "I do, but I'll never get to that until I've established that I love them and I can earn their trust so that they can love me." So foundationally, in everything you do as a leader, love the people, love the ministry, love your church, and first and foremost, love God. Secondly, trust. And we'll see data later on that underscores the importance of trust. Without trust, you will never be a leader. Period. Full stop. End of conversation. If people will not trust you, they will not follow you. More on that later. The third criteria is humility. Now, it used to be in the old frame before Spears and even Greenleaf, people would think of these great dynamic didactic leaders that would stand up there and shout instructions and people would charge into battle on them. And in some circumstances, that's an appropriate strategy. But the most effective leaders in organizations are leaders that actually demonstrate humility. And this was proven scientifically by a guy by the name of Jim Collins. Some of you may be familiar with his book, Good to Great, where they did an empirical assessment of the greatest leaders of the greatest successful businesses. And what they found was that what they called their level 5 leaders, their most effective leaders, had a substantial portion of humility in the way they led their people. Humility is critically important. If you are too arrogant, if you are not the kind of person that isn't willing to laugh and joke about your own misgivings and your own shortcomings and show humility in your own life, you will never inspire others to follow you. So we now have 3 foundational elements of love, trust, and humility, all of which have to be earned. Then we now look at you. You have to demonstrate courage, the willingness to look into an uncertain future and help inspire people to find a path forward, to be courageous enough to try new things without knowing whether they're going to work or not, and make some mistakes, admit your mistakes and fix it, and then go on to something else. The greatest leaders are not the leaders that keep an organization stagnant or right where it is. The greatest leaders do what that word actually implies. They lead someone to another place. After we've identified the foundational elements of love, trust, and humility, and we model the courage to go forward, now we have to organize a team. And again, whether you're a priest, a parish council member, or a ministry leader, you cannot do it all yourself in the church. We need to build teams. So learning team building skills is essential, and we'll cover that in a little bit. Finally, but not least important, we have to have a vision. In order to lead people, you have to have some place that you're leading them to, so that you're not wandering around in the circle. Think in the terms of the Old Testament in this regard, right? And we think about this enormous challenge that was facing Moses, and he was responsible for leading his people to where? The promised land. Now, it took them 40 years to get there and a lot of detours and a lot of mistakes. But what kept them going was the fact that he loved them. He had established trust and they trusted him. Sometimes they had their doubts, but they trusted him. He demonstrated humility over and over again by submitting himself to the Lord and others. He had the courage to confront evil when he faced it and mistakes when they were made. But he built this team and he cast them forward on the vision to reach the promised land. And they did, and indeed they did. So here's the little test that I developed for Orthodox servant leaders. And I encourage leaders, whether they are priests, whether they are parish council members, whether they're ministry leaders, to actually take this test. And I encourage you to take this test annually. So it's a 5-scale thing. If you never demonstrate that behavior, you give yourself a 1. If you always demonstrate that behavior, I think you're lying, because probably nobody can always demonstrate these behaviors. But give yourself a 5, and then rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 in each of these characteristics. Do you love unconditionally? Do you do what you say? Do you admit your mistakes? Do you persevere regardless of the dangers, the difficulties, or the uncertainties that face you? Do you support your people, your team? And are you leading to a righteous destination? And I encourage people to give themselves this test and then go to work on the characteristic you scored the lowest on, and then take the test again and actually continually try to do that so that you can build on it and grow and improve as you develop your servant leadership skills. And to demonstrate the importance of this, back to Kouzes and Posner's book, they ran a survey that's been going on now for about 3 decades. Tens of thousands of people have taken the survey. And what they asked them were, what are the characteristics, the qualities that you want in your leaders? And they gave them a long list of qualities and they allowed them to rate it. And after they got done with this, after tens and tens of thousands of people taking this, there were four characteristics that bubbled up to the top that were so much higher than any of these other legitimate characteristics that they concluded empirically, you got to have these characteristics if you're going to be an effective leader. And here they are. First and foremost, 85% of the people said honesty is the most critical value. If you're not honest with me, if you're not truth telling, if there's no integrity to what you do, I will follow you nowhere. Goes back to that foundational element of trust that you saw in Greenleaf's model and my model. Honesty is critically important. Folks, that also introduces the humility of acknowledging when maybe you made a mistake, maybe you didn't do something right. You have got to build integrity, or you will never, ever, ever be a leader of anybody. The second characteristic was a little bit surprising to people because they thought that some of the other things would be second. But second on the list was forward-looking. People want their leaders to lead them somewhere, to take them in a positive direction, to lead them to a better place than where they are now, whether on their own spiritual journey to theosis, their better liturgical practice or sacramental practice, or understanding the Holy Gospel better, or being better in whatever ministry. You as a leader have to be focused on the future. You have to be focused on making the changes. You have to be focused on the vision, because that's what people are looking for in their leaders. Here's the third characteristic. You have to be inspiring. That doesn't mean that you have to be one of these people that stands up on the street corner and shouts out and everybody wants to follow you in battle. People are inspiring in different ways. Look at Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was one of the most inspirational leaders you could ever see, but she did it quietly in her own way by modeling and demonstrating the behavior and being relentless in her care for the poor and needy. So however it is that God has gifted you with the ability to inspire others, you have to be inspiring if you're going to be a leader. And the fourth characteristic that they found in leadership was competency. Now, isn't that interesting? Because most people thought that competency would be the first thing we would look for in our leaders. And indeed, competency is important, but it is not as important as honesty, being forward-looking, and inspiring people. And if you're interested, you could look later on. Here are the other characteristics that they were asking for and the percentage of people that responded to each of them. And you would not argue with any of these characteristics of leadership. And you'll notice that even every one of them got some percentage of the people responding. But I want you always focusing on, am I being honest? Do I have integrity in what I'm doing? Am I showing the love? Am I earning the respect? Am I looking to the future? Am I leading people? Am I courageous in being able and willing to go forward and take mistakes, or take new challenges and maybe make some mistakes, but then make the corrections to fix them? And am I inspiring people to be better today than they were yesterday, and even better tomorrow than they were today? And then I have to be competent at what I do. So let's start to look at some of these elements, and let's talk about what you as leaders universally feel is among your biggest challenges. Vilfredo Pareto, a great Italian mind, is the one that is credited for creating the 80-20 rule. And every one of you have cited it, whether you know the 80-20 rule or not. It's where you say that 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people, or 80% of the money is contributed by 20% of the donors. And we see this over and over and over again. And whenever I hear a parish or a parish leadership or a parish council or even a parish priest tell me they're suffering with the 80-20 problem, I sympathize with them. I understand it. But I remind them that that's a leadership problem, because they haven't figured out how to get that 80% off the bench and into the game. So how do we go ahead and prove that Pareto was wrong? Well, actually, there is a roadmap for how to do it. In fact, you're going to hear me use this phrase over and over again throughout this entire presentation. It's the reason why my book and my dissertation was named a roadmap, not the roadmap. There are probably multiple different ways to get there. But I wanted to make sure that you had specific tools that you could implement to better improve your leadership characteristics. First, you have to clarify and enculturate your why. If you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, if your parish doesn't know why it's doing what it's doing, you will never inspire people to get off the bench and get in the game. And then you not only have to have clarity of that why, but it has to have everybody agree on that why and engage with that why. It's the reason why in the Metropolis of Boston, when we take you through strategic planning, one of the first exercises we do is to have a why discovery process with your parish. And listen to me, even if you're not ready for a full-blown strategic planning exercise, by all means consider engaging in a why discovery process, because there's nothing more foundationally powerful than when a parish has clarity and buy-in into their why. Secondly, you have to train your leaders to be effective servant leaders, which means every leader is in the leadership development business. And it doesn't matter whether you're the Paristamina or whether you're a member of the parish council. You are always there to inspire and train other leaders. And that's the reason why we're giving you this program and some other materials that you can actually implement to improve leadership. Third, in order to absolve the 80-20 rule and overcome it, you have to have clearly defined roles, duties, and here's the key, expectations, including time commitments. What's interesting is the Gallup organization that has been studying Christian churches for well over 80 years now has found that one of the distinguishing characteristics within churches that are most effective and most healthy is when they create expectations of their members and they communicate that expectation of their members, and therefore their members know what it is they need to do in order to fulfill that. And you can look no further than, and we don't have to get in an argument about whether this is a Christian church or not, but the Mormon church, as an example, has very clear expectations. For example, they expect that every one of their youth will give 1 year of service to the church. Whether it's after high school, in the middle of college, or after college, they expect that their children will give 1 year of service to the church. It's the reason why you run into all these young men and young women in your communities that are serving their year of service in one or more different capacities. Now, all I'm saying in this is by having clarity of your roles, your duties, and to make expectations clear is one of the ways you solve this problem. If you believe, or if you allow your parishioners to believe that all they need to do is show up in church on Sunday and that's good enough, well, then that's probably all you're going to get, and the Pareto principle will continue to apply. The fourth element is to over-communicate these roles, duties, and expectations. It's not just a one-time communication. It's constant repetition over and over and over again. It's not bludgeoning them. It's not criticizing them. It is merely identifying, look, this is what it means to be an Orthodox Christian. Our Lord and Savior did this over and over again. And even when his apostles or some of the other disciples that follow them failed, he didn't just let it pass. He looked at it as a teachable moment, and he over-communicated that responsibility. The way you get people off the bench and into the game is by over-communicating the roles, duties, and expectations. Number 5, you have to provide mentoring and guidance. Not everybody's capable of leading or doing the things that you want. That's fine. But that's where you provide a mentor, somebody that can help them through the process. Throughout the entire metropolis of Boston, there are individuals that are mentoring different aspects of the ministries, both in TCI and the strategic planning and in all the other ministries that Father Tevin and his eminence have going on. You need to create that same vehicle in your parishes. Otherwise, you're going to continue to have a bunch of bench sitters. Number 6, you got to manage the results and not the processes. One of the quickest ways to get a new volunteer to stop volunteering is to micromanage them and tell them everything you want them to do exactly the way you want them to do it. As opposed to saying, here are some ways to do this, but here's the objective we want you to achieve. Now go out and pray about it and figure out what's the best way to get it done. But if you're going to sit there and second guess them every step of the way, watch them quit and stay. They'll stay in the parish, but they're no longer going to serve in leadership. When I talk to people that are really dynamic people that are actively engaged in their church and all of a sudden drop out of their leadership position, and I ask them why, more often than not, there are other reasons, but more often than not, it's because they were constantly being micromanaged by either a priest or a parish council or another ministry person. You got to let people use the gifts that God gave them. Manage the results you want them to achieve, not the processes of how they do it. Number 7, this is where the number 6 comes to meet its final destination. You need to hold people accountable. You're including yourselves, and help them succeed. Don't hold them accountable and be critical. Hold them accountable and say, okay, we didn't achieve that objective the way we said we were going to do it, Let's understand why, and let's figure out what we need to do so that next time we achieve it. And then finally, we get to over communicating the impact of the ministries on the parish. And if I could give you one takeaway for all of your ministries, including your communications ministries, this is one of the biggest challenges. You can never over communicate enough the impact of your ministries. I see all the time parishes sending me their pleas for more money or their pleas for more volunteers. And I always ask them, how's that working for you? And the answer is, it's not. And the answer comes back to, it's because you're talking about what you want. What you haven't shared with them is the impact of what happens when they give you what you want them to do. Show how you're changing lives, how you're making things better, how you're improving people's lives. And then finally, always, always, always be focused on succession planning. Who's going to pick up the ball and run with it when you're no longer able? Now, one of the resources that's out there, it's going to be in one of the books that I highly recommend, is Patrick Lencioni. Some of you may be familiar with him, where he talks about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I'm going to cover that briefly. But he actually, in his research with his consultancy, again, multi-decades, identified the characteristics of what he calls a dream team member, a team player. And he narrowed it down to 3 characteristics. Now, I'm giving you a lot of different professionals that have done a lot of studying about leadership from a lot of different perspectives. But what I'm going to challenge you to do is to see how systematically these things are repeating themselves over and over again. So regardless of who's doing the studying, we're seeing these same things come up again. Pat Lencioni's research has shown that the best team player is humble. They're not arrogant. They're not ego-driven. They would rather share the credit and experience with others. Now, there's another point he makes out. Humility isn't a lack of confidence. You can be confident in your own ability and still be humble in the way you present yourself, and humble enough to admit that as much as you don't know it all, and there's somebody that probably knows more than you do. And if you will just ask questions and engage and listen aggressively, you will learn and you will become a better leader. When I was first titling my dissertation, the professor said, "Are you going to call it the roadmap?" And I said, "No, that's too arrogant. That assumes that I'm the only one that knows the roadmap." No, this is a roadmap, and I'm encouraging, and in fact, throughout the book, I encourage others to take it, tell me what's wrong with it, and make it better the next time. The third characteristic that Lencioni identified is hunger. They have a strong work ethic, and they're not easily satisfied. They will never do the bare minimum. They won't mail it in. They will always be the person that goes above and beyond. When I was practicing law for over 40 years, I did mergers and acquisitions work, and I was representing one of the largest investment companies. And I was talking with their COO, and I said, "What do you look for when you're hiring leaders?" And he said, "PWP." And I said, "Okay, well, that's not what I was looking for. Tell me what PWP means." He said, "Poor with potential," meaning they were hungry. They came from humble roots. They understood what it was like to start out, but they were hungry and they were going to drive to be successful, not at the expense of integrity, not the expense of building trust, not at the expense of other people, but they were going to go above and beyond. So that was his second characteristic. The third characteristic that Lencioni talks about is being smart. Now, we're not necessarily applying intelligence tests on everybody. It's being emotionally smart, showing common sense with people, the ability to read the room, and to think about how what you're saying is going to impact other people and affect other people. I mean, how many times have you sat in a meeting and you see somebody who's leading a meeting and they say something that shows they have no common sense about them? They're clearly not reading the room. They just said something in a way that was not only not going to be inspiring of everybody, it was actually going to turn some people off. So yes, you have to be intellectually smart and intellectually honest, but what you really need to be is emotionally smart and able to lead people in the way they want to lead it. And we have no greater example, the person that actually, I believe, deserves all the credit for the greatest leadership expression ever done, and it's our very own St. John Chrysostom. In the 4th century, he established the credentials for the great leaders. Now, I put some numbers here just to make it easy, but he didn't have the numbers in his thing. He said the most basic task of the church leader. So, proskome, pay attention, folks. He gave you 4 pieces of instruction. First, discern the spiritual gifts of all those under your authority. Listen to them, ask them, engage with them, look at them, find out what gifts God has given them. Don't try to make them into something they're not. God has already designed in them what he wants out of them. So all you have to do is to spend the time to discern those gifts. Now that you've discerned the gifts, their calling, if you will, we go to number 2. Now you have to encourage them to use those gifts. How much? To the full. For who? For the benefit of all. So stop right there. 4 parts. Your job as a leader of your parish, whether you're a priest or parish council member, ministry leader, it doesn't matter. I want to challenge you next Sunday when you're in church. Everybody you see, I want you to challenge yourself. Do I know what spiritual gifts they have? Have I encouraged them to use those gifts fully so that everybody could benefit? And if the answer is no, great, there's an opportunity for you. When we go back to Vilfredo Pareto, when I ask people all the time, well, why aren't you more engaged in your church? Or why aren't you involved in ministries? Or why aren't you showing up? The number one answer I get is not somebody turned me off or somebody made me mad. It's nobody asked me. So we're not actually doing that which St. John Chrysostom asked us to do. Constantly looking. You know, he hates it when I brag about him. When I brag about him now, one of the things that Father Ted does really well, so you can learn from this, and there's others on this call that do it. He's constantly sizing up everybody and anybody who he interacts with, and he's doing that discernment process. And then he is unapologetic about asking them to engage in the process. I mean, unapologetic, but in a loving and a humble sort of way. And St. John Chrysostom ended it very directly by saying that only a person who can discern the gifts of others and can humbly rejoice in the flowering of those gifts is fit to lead the church. I always like to cite that to some of our church hierarchs and our church leaders and our church parish council presidents of saying, our fitness as determined by St. John Chrysostom is if we're bringing out the gifts that God gave in our parishioners to each and every one of them. Tell a little story. Some of you may have heard this. This has been roaming around the internet about one of the greatest unknown church leaders who actually changed history in the way he did it. The story is told about a guy by the name of Mordecai Ham, who in 1934 was one of those tent revival preachers that was going around and yelling and screaming and hollering, getting people all excited about God and Christ and talking about the love of God. And he was doing a tent revival in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1934. And as it happened, 2 14-year-old boys were turned away because by the time they got there were no seats in that tent. And an unknown usher, we do not know his name, ran after these young boys because he looked and said, what are these young boys doing at this adult tent revival? He said, listen, I'll find a place for you to sit. I'll find a place for you to hear this message. If God has brought you here, I'm not going to let you walk away without hearing it. And as it turned out, one of those guys was a guy by the name of Grady Wilson. And Grady Wilson and his friend were so moved by what Mordecai Ham said about the love of God and the love of Jesus that they decided at that moment in time, at the age of 14, that they were going to give their entire life to Christ. And they did. It transformed their life. And everything they did for the rest of their lives was focused on serving the Lord and giving glory to God. Well, I told you there were 2 young men that almost got turned away. And I gave you the name of one, Grady Ham. Who was the other man? The other man was his best friend, the Reverend Billy Graham. And Billy Graham on that night found Jesus and turned his life around to the Lord because of why? Because there was an extraordinary leader, and it wasn't Mordecai Ham. It was that unnamed usher who would not allow those 2 young men to walk away. And I celebrate this to tell you that you have the opportunity to bring people closer to Christ and each other every day in your ministry. Don't miss that opportunity when it's presented. Now, maybe you're not going to be introduced the next Billy Graham into the Orthodox Church, but what I am telling you is that no soul is too unimportant to be left behind. You as a leader have that responsibility. As we start to segue over, there's another phenomenal book that I recommend about mastering leadership. And they talked about 4 universal promises of leaders. I'm giving you multiple different perspectives of what great leadership is and asking you to put them all together in one model that we're going to see at the end. They said the 4 best promises is, have you set the right direction and create meaningful work? Different set of researchers, different set of theories, different set of work that they did, coming back to the same thing that you heard Pat Lencioni say, that you heard Greenleaf say, that you heard me say, that you've heard others say. Are you creating a vision and a direction and a roadmap and creating expectations that are clear for people to execute? Make it clear. Secondly, engaging all the stakeholders and then holding them accountable for the performance. Don't let the 80% sit on the bench. Find a way to engage them. Now, you'll never get to 100% because things are happening in people's lives and they may not be ready to commit, but you've got to go and reach out to those people. Thirdly, ensure the processes and the systems that you have in place will facilitate and focus on the execution. In other words, get the friction out of the way, get the noise out of the way. If you've got somebody in a ministry and they can't get it done because of something that you can fix, go fix it. I listen to people tell me about their problems, and I say, oh, the choir and the chanters are complaining. Well, why? Well, it's because the sound system isn't working. And I'm going, do you know how easy that is to fix? Make it so that they can be successful at what they do. And then fourthly, it's leading effectively by maintaining trust to achieve sustainable, desired results. Again, we're hearing this trust and integrity come out over and over again. So if you look at the work, and I've given you 5 different perspectives that are all pointing us in the same direction, from the theological to the practical to the research, all pointing us in the same direction of what does it take to be a great leader in your parish. One of the elements from somebody who was not a fully great leader, not in every way, but what truly changed the world, a guy by the name of Steve Jobs, who started Apple Computers. He said, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. He said, we hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And I ask you to think about this in the course of your ministry. This is why I said earlier, and I repeat again now, don't micromanage people. Don't tell them this is the way they have to do it. Because if you cut them loose, sometimes they'll find better ways to do it that you didn't even imagine. And sometimes they're not even an expert in that. I mean, in a moment, if this sounds like a moment of unhumility, but 30 years I'm making gyro sandwiches in the Greek festival, and after about 4 years of going through the steps that the great restaurateurs told us to take, I said to myself, well, why don't we combine these 2 steps? And all the restaurateurs said, oh, you're crazy. What does a lawyer know about things? We're restaurant experts. And when we combine those 2 steps, we literally improve the efficiency of our ability to make gyro sandwiches at the festival by almost a third. Now, that sounds like a literally simple, ridiculous example, but it is one of many examples of what happens when you don't micromanage people and you let them experiment and try new things in the church and see if they can't come up with better ways of doing things. What I ask you to do is to manage the results, not the processes. But now we have to talk about a systemic problem. This is a systemic problem that you inherited. It is not of your making. Around the 1950s was when the Archdiocese created the parish council model. That was about when it was invented. And that is the exact same model that from the 1950s that we're using now, 75 years later. So I want to challenge you. Can you name any effective U.S. entity that is using the exact same operational model for over 70 years? And the answer is you cannot. And here we are kind of rooted in the past. So I want to kind of break the mold for you. I want to put out a visionary idea for you that when parishes have implemented, it has transformed those parishes. It's what we call a council of ministries. Some of you may have heard us talk about it before. So let's talk about what a council of ministries is. First, every major parish activity is a ministry, and we have co-chairs of that ministry. And I don't care what it is. Cutting the grass is a ministry. Being a chanter is a ministry. Serving the poor is a ministry. Running the youth programs is a ministry. Doing the sound systems is a ministry. Everything is a ministry because everything is serving the purpose of bringing people closer to Christ and each other. And we ask for co-chairs because somebody may get sick or somebody may get busy. We don't have committees anymore. We have ministries. And we want to think about the most broad array of ministries we can, including those that we don't have, that we should have, that would allow us to greater fulfill. So we start by saying we create this massive number of ministries and we get co-chairs for each of them. Secondly, we ask those ministries to basically do 2 things. Why do you exist? What's the fundamental purpose your ministry exists? Why should anybody care? Why should anybody join your ministry? And number 2, What is your plan and your budget? What do you need in order to succeed to achieve your why? We aggregate all of those budgets and then add the operating expenses to the church. And by the way, that should be the budget for the church. That's not the way we do budgeting now, but that's the way it should be. Thirdly, each ministry will have a parish council liaison. Look, we can't change the parish council model yet. Maybe in the fullness of time we will. But let's start by taking all of the parish council members that are not officers and give them a liaison responsibility to one or more ministries. I saw somebody sneeze in one of the rooms, so I'm going to give you a blessing. I don't have any authority to give blessings, but you have my blessings anyway. Okay. So now all of our parish council members have a ministry in which, or two or three, that they're the liaison to. That doesn't mean they're running it. That means they attend and participate in their processes. Now we gather this council of ministries where all the ministry leaders, together with the parish council, meets at least quarterly. And in those meetings, they share what their major visions are. They share what their major activities are. They share what their major needs are. And they plan the whole year in advance. And then they measure themselves each quarter as to how they're doing. They'll identify common needs that they have so they can work together. They may identify common expenses that need to be incurred so that they can better manage what they want. Now, one of the elements that you're going to do in your parish that will transform your parish, hint, this is also going to transform your stewardship ministry, is to create a parish ministry handbook. For those of you old enough, you can think of the Sears Roebuck's catalog, okay? Here's your parish ministry handbook. It's real simple. You have one page for every ministry. And in that page, they have a couple of paragraphs that merely summarize why that ministry exists, what it does, and some of its most significant accomplishments. Why does it exist? Because that's what's going to inspire people. What does it actually do to achieve that why? And here's a couple of success stories. Then it'll list the ministry co-chairs and their contact information. And finally, it'll include any pictures from that ministry in action. That ministry handbook is what you're going to use in your stewardship ministry. It's what you're going to put on your website. It's what you're going to give to every catechumen or every visitor to your church to let them know to see what's viable and what's happening in your parish. And that's how you're going to excite more and more people to get engaged. If you're looking for examples, I have a link on my website, including some concrete examples of some phenomenal ministry handbooks, one of which actually came from your Metropolis. Look, folks, here's the point. Great people in poorly designed organizations will fail. Great people in poorly designed organizations will fail. If you've got 80% of your parishioners not engaging in the ministry, if you've got people sitting on the bench, if you've got people not contributing, whether it's their time, their talents, or their treasures, that's a leadership problem. That's not their problem. That's a leadership problem. And you have the opportunity now to practice those elements of servant leadership, those effective characteristics that people are looking in leaders, and to think about the change and the vision for the future to make the change. So let me talk briefly about how to have a more effective parish council and general assembly meeting. Now we're getting very granular because this is something that comes up all the time. I want to say it's really funny. When I first did this slide, I'm not a good typist, and I type in how to have a more productive pariah council meeting. And I thought, well, that's sending the wrong signal. I had to spell check my own work. So we don't want the pariahs. Okay. There's a couple of elements. Here's the element that is most often overlooked. It's the preparation before the meeting. You should have clear objectives of what you're trying to accomplish in that meeting. And you have to decide what we're going to be accomplishing, what we're going to decide. Secondly, distribute everything in advance. The agenda should go on in advance. The previous minute meeting should go on in advance. The financial report should go on in advance. And if there's any ministry updates, they should go on in advance. If you're doing it at the time of your meeting, it means people weren't thinking about it enough far in advance, and nobody's going to read it. And if they are, they're distracting from the meeting itself. All of that needs to be done in advance of the meeting. If it's important enough for me to read it, if it's important enough for me to know it, send it to me in advance when I have a couple of days to look it over. Third, keep the agenda focused. Prioritize strategic topics and decisions, and leave all the informational updates to just written reports. I can't tell you how many times parish council meetings have drawn on and on and on in what is committee business. I served on the parish council once where for hours we argued about whether we were going to have a neoprene roof or a polyprene roof. And none of us knew the difference, but we were there and we were arguing about it. Focus on the strategic and important matters, not the tactical informational matters. Handle those out in reports. Confirm attendance in advance. Don't be surprised if your presenter doesn't show up. Don't be surprised if you're not going to have a quorum at the meeting. And then finally, establish time limits. Assign a specific and realistic time limit for every item on the agenda. Now, sometimes you'll go over and sometimes you'll be quicker, but you got to have discipline. Now we get to the meeting itself. During the meeting, start on time, end on time. Be respectful of people's time, because if you're not, then they're going to start showing up late and thinking that's okay, and they're going to show and leave early thinking that's okay. Second, focus on the decisions that matter. Now, here's a phrase that I want you to think about. It's called a consent agenda for routine, non-controversial items. Don't start with your minutes. Don't start with minor report approvals. You're already starting to lose people. That's just a consent stuff. Everybody okay with that stuff that was sent out to you? You'll see where it shows up on the agenda in a second. Third, facilitate as a leader, don't dominate. All too often we've seen meetings where the facilitator, whether it's the parish council president or the ministry leader, is running everything and having to say something on everything, and people start checking out. You want to keep as many people engaged as possible within the time limits. Your job is to keep the agenda flowing, not to be the person that's making all the decisions. Make every decision by consensus. You should not need to vote on anything unless the law requires it. So if you're getting a new loan, for example, the bank's going to require a formal consent resolution that says you took this action and you have the right votes. And then finally, you capture any action items. Write down who's going to do, what they're going to do, and what the deadline is, so that everybody walks out of that meeting with clarity about, I have this responsibility and I have this deadline. So if you look at the way these agenda go, we're completely reversing it. I'm going to give you an example in just a second. The third phase, we talked about the pre-meeting, we talked about the meeting. Well, there's a follow-up phase after the meeting. This is where you distribute the minutes and any other information. The minutes should be able to be done within 2 or 3, 4 days at max. Send them out in advance. Second, monitor the progress. The president or some designated person is following up with those people who had a responsibility that they assumed at the last meeting and saying, how's it going? Are you on track? Do you need anything? Is everything going well? Don't wait until the next meeting to be surprised and find out they didn't do what they said they were going to do. Third, evaluate your past meeting. Were we prepared? Did we stay on time? Did we do what we said we would do, or did we get bogged down on an issue? And constantly change what is a problem. Let me give you a sample agenda. You don't have to use this agenda, but I will tell you this is a far more effective agenda than perhaps some of the agendas you may be using. Obviously, we begin with the priest with an opening prayer and whatever theological reflection or academic educational activity they want to give us. They should be teaching us as leaders of the parish something theologically at every meeting beyond just the prayer. And I'm not using the word just in front of prayer ill-advisedly. The prayer is critically important. Now, the president, you only update any major information since the last meeting. Chances are you won't have much to say at this point. But if a major activity occurred since the last meeting, this is your point to update it. A major activity is a highly important strategic thing, not some tactical thing. Joe responded to that letter that we sent him. Who cares? We'll get to that later on. Only what's significant, because your job is focused on the future. Your job is focused on change. You're focused on leading the vision of where they're going. That's your report. That's the second thing. Here's the third thing. If you have a strategic plan, then that's what you talk about. That's the brief presentation from the people that are leading your strategic planning initiatives. If you don't have a strategic plan, every parish has a few strategic initiatives. Those are things that are going to take between 2 to 3 years to achieve, significant things that you're working on, not things that you can get done in less than a year. You want to focus on those first because that's the most important time. You got people's energy and attention, and now we want them focused on the big things that are going to make a difference. As we use the phrase from the Covey organization, the few things that will change everything. Fourth, If there is a major decision, this will almost never happen at your parish council meeting. You need to approve a budget. You need to approve a loan. That's when you take up that major activity that requires parish council approval. Most times you don't have a major activity that needs approval. Now we get to the ministry updates. This is where all of the parish council members who have a liaison responsibility with one or more of the ministries will share not everything that happened in that ministry, but anything important that happened in that ministry. Let me give you an example. If your church has 20 ministries and you have 10 extra parish council members, other than the president, the secretary, and treasurer who have duties, we have 10 extra parish council members. Each of them will be a liaison to 2 ministries. At this point, if something significant has happened with their ministry, they report it so that the entire parish council and the entire parish leadership is focused on that. Now, notice what we've done. We have completely changed the focus and the agenda of the parish council to be focusing on strategic, important issues and ministry work, not the mundane. Now we get to the treasurer's report. This is not going through every line item of every budget and explaining why we spent an extra $36 on snow removal than we did last time. That's committee work. That's the finance committee's work. You should present the highlight of here are the 2 or 3 things that you need to know by looking at the budget. I'm going to give you a sample dashboard in a second that you feel free to use if you want to. Now we get to the consents. This is all the busy work that you're used to starting out with. We passed out the minutes at the last meeting. Does anybody have any issues or problems with that? Any changes? None? By consent, we're good with that? Great. That's fine. We circulated a couple of reports of various ministries. Did anybody have any questions or comments on that? Hearing none, can we agree by consensus we adopt them? Great. Boom. And now all of a sudden you're just knocking out the busy work at the very end when people's energy is dissipated. A review at this point of the action items for the next meeting is what's called for. We agreed earlier on in sections 3 and 4 and maybe 5 that we have to do these following things for the next meeting. Here's who's going to do it. Here's what they're going to do. And here's the deadline. And then you end with the closing prayer. We've completely upended the entire agenda that you're probably used to doing by taking the busy work and taking it off the agenda. Let the committees, let the ministries, let the subgroups do their work. They can write a report, they can present it. If anybody has any questions, they can ask their question. But that's busy work. Minutes are busy work. Reviewing every line item financial statement is busy work. You want to focus on the most important and strategic issues, and you want to focus on what the ministries are doing, because that's what's going to drive the future of the parish. This is a dashboard that we have provided you, and it's been shared previously before. This is an example of one. It's not one of your parishes, so don't worry about it. But this shows you in the top boxes the 7 items that you should be reporting on. What's our total income? What's our total stewardship income? What's our total expenses? What's our net income and loss? The percentage of our expenses covered by our stewardship, the number of stewards, and the median stewardship pledge, not the average. Let me stop you right there. You always are doing 3 years at a time. So the last year out is the baseline. And then you do, so in this hypothetical example, we were looking at 22, 2023, and 2024. Now we're in the year of 2024. For example, in this hypothetical, we look at it, we show up at the parish council meeting, the treasurer presents the dashboard. We don't have to worry about the things that are in green, folks. They're going fine. But the things in red, that's what we need to talk about. Now, all of a sudden, we have focused our attention on the few things that matter, not the minutia that frankly doesn't matter and isn't going to drive the distinction in the church. This is an example. Feel free to use it. Feel free to create your own. But this is an example of focusing people's attention on the things that matter and not the things that you're going to talk and debate about that really don't matter. Quick reminder of consensus. It's seeking the common mind through respectful dialogue. It's ultimately an agreement that everybody can live with. And the way you know you've reached consensus is everybody agrees. We've had a full and fair discussion. Everybody's had their input. We've made changes based on what everybody said. And now we've come up with an answer that we can all live with. We're not voting yes or no. This is not a majority versus minority situation, because when you do that, the minority are always upset because they didn't get their way. But if you can keep talking through an issue that's important, that's strategic, that matters, and reach a consensus on it, and everybody can live with it, then you're going to leave that meeting with the opportunity to know that you have achieved something that everybody can be supportive of. So that's just a quick reminder of a longer conversation of consensus. Now, one of the topics we're not going to spend a lot of time on, but it's one of the common refrains I get from every parish. You know, our general assemblies, nobody shows up. They're a waste of time. We can't get anything done. We don't get anybody there, you know, and the way I like to say it is we have allowed our general assembly meetings to become the places where the serial arsonists thrive. Now, a serial arsonist, if you're not familiar with that phrase, is somebody that likes to start fires because they love to see things burn. And the minute the fire goes out, they like to start another fire. They don't really care to get anything done. They just want to start fires. And when you look at who attends your General Assembly, it basically is three groups of people. It's those that have to be there, parish council members or their family, people that were left over from the coffee hour or the luncheon and didn't get away in time, and it's the serial arsonists. And that's really not why they're really not very effective, you know? So the question I ask you to ask yourself when you look at your dumpster fire that tends to be so many of our General Assembly meetings, and I hope you're having a little fun with this part of the expression over here, because I hear this all the time with parishioners, is why would any parishioner want to attend your General Assembly meeting the way you're currently constituting? Do you realize what I've said before, that every church problem is a leadership problem? If you're not getting people at your General Assembly, it's because you don't have a General Assembly worth attending. So the question you need to ask yourself, and better yet, ask the people that aren't attending, is what would it take to have at our General Assembly meeting that would get you to want to show up? What would it take? And I can promise you, it's not probably about 80% of what you're doing. Again, going endless reports on this, that, and the other thing that they can just as easily read in a bulletin or an update or in an annual report is not going to inspire anybody to get there. But if you can bring forward insightful presenters, people that inspire them, if you can talk about life-changing ministries, if you can talk about where the future of the church is going to be in a year or two or three, those are some of the things, not all, but some of the things that are going to drive people there. So I'm asking you now, as leaders of the church, to take on the responsibility of completely reimagining your General Assembly meeting. Now, I gave you an agenda for your parish council meeting. I hope you'll consider that or some permutation of that. But I don't want to give you one for your General Assembly meeting, because that would be imposing my view on it as opposed to understanding what your parishioners want. What you need to do is find out, I'm going to use a phrase that's a business phrase, I don't mean it to offend anybody, what your customers want. What would it take for them to show up at a General Assembly meeting and to be excited about being there? Other than the serial arsonists, the people that have to be there, or the people that just got stuck after the agape lunch, whatever, okay? So start to imagine what it takes. And frankly, you can get people to show up at a General Assembly meeting and have them be excited about being there and the decisions they're making and now being a part of the ministries. That's a to-do list item for you. All right, I'm going to cover this one really quickly because I have to. This is one of the legal requirements that's in parish council training. I'm not saying it's unimportant. I'm just saying it is not the most inspiring part of it, and it's all covered in details. You have to provide certain things. You have to provide the vision for the parish. You have to provide the resources for the parish. You don't mean you don't have to write all the checks, but ultimately you have to be responsible for the budget, the finance, the development of what needs to happen. You need to make sure that you're recruiting the talent, and you recruit talent that in turn recruits talent, that in turn recruits talent, and all of a sudden you have an army to do that. Fourthly, you have administrative responsibilities. And fifthly, and this is something nobody told you, but I'm telling you, you have an evangelism responsibility. You reflect the parish. When people see you, they should see your parish. It's as if you're wearing your parish jersey everywhere you go. So when you do something that is righteous, it reflects positively on the parish. When you do something that's less than righteous, it reflects negatively on the parish. So those are 5 kind of responsibilities, but let's look deeply. And I'm supposed to go over this in great length, but frankly, I find this to be somewhat pedestrian, so I'm going to go through it real quickly. Article 29 of the regulations, every one of you should read. I'm not going to do it for you. That is the actual list of responsibilities that parish council members have. I'm going to focus on 4, and I'll list the rest of them. Do you know that your first responsibility in the regulations is to attend the Divine Liturgy regularly? And this will come as a shock to you. Being in the Pagadi, being out in the narthex is not attending the Divine Liturgy. Your job is to attend the Divine Liturgy. It's in the regulations, folks. You can, don't fuss at me if you want to. Go read the regulations, Article 29. Second one, you are to participate in the church sacramental life. Remember when I said that when you're out there, you're wearing the jersey of your parish? When they see you, they should see everybody in the parish. You have to be there liturgically. You have to be there sacramentally. You have to be engaged. That's what it means to be a leader. You cannot talk it if you're not willing to walk it. Or as I like to say, your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying. Your third prescribed duty in the regulations, I'm not making this up, is to assist the priest in the administration of the parish ministries. Now, I focus on the word assist because the priest, as proestamino, has not only the spiritual responsibility, but the ultimate leadership responsibility. Your jobs are to assist them, not to tell them what to do, but to assist them to achieve what they want to do. And this is one of those nuances that sometimes we tend to forget, particularly those of us that have led business organizations or been in leadership organizations. You know, when I was managing partner at the law firm, I couldn't take that same mindset when I walked into the Metropolis Council meeting or Archdiocesan Council meeting or Parish Council meeting. We are there to assist the proestamino. And the fourth duty, it's written in the UPR, test me, I'm testing you, you can go look it up, is to establish appropriate ministries. Now, that doesn't mean you have to run every ministry, but what it does mean is if there's a ministry that's missing, you have to do what St. John Chrysostom said. Go into the community, find someone who feels called to work in that area, and bring them forward and help create those ministries. Now, there are an additional 13 very specific enumerated duties that are listed in the regulations. You can read them. You don't need my help on this. These are okay. They're important, but they're not as important as those first four. Now, one other thing that I am required to do, which I will go through quickly, and then I'm going to introduce Rita to cover one element of it, is to remind you that as a matter of law, now I'm putting my legal hat on, folks, you have three duties. What's called a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, and a duty of obedience. These are year-long classes in law school. I'm going to condense them down just to a few minutes and a few bullet points on the slide. What does it mean to have a duty of care? You must always act in good faith and diligently. You cannot act in bad faith, and you cannot just walk your way through it and say, I don't really care about that. No, your duty is to act diligently. You should understand the parish's business. I know the parish is not a business, but there's a business side to that. That includes the financial side. That includes the operational side. You have a duty under the law, I didn't make this up, to understand its business. Thirdly, you have a duty to actively participate in your meetings. As a board member, the law says board members must actively participate in meetings of the board. That's what the parish council is. You must actively participate, otherwise you're violating your legal duty of care. Fourthly, you're responsible for providing a strategic direction, not by yourself, by building that consensus and then overseeing management to execute that. In your case, the management are the ministries or the strategic planning teams. Those are all the ones that are actually leading every element of it. Then you're to ask any questions, secure any facts you need, and use your own judgment in making decisions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I can't tell you the number of times I've left a meeting and I listened to a parish council person say, I really wish I would have known that. And I go, why didn't you ask? Oh, I didn't want to ask. No, that's your legal duty. Then finally, you have the duty to seek out independent professional advice when needed. This means that if you don't have the expertise yourself or on your council, you need to get the appropriate professional advice. This is what the law requires. This isn't in the regulations. Third, the second duty is the duty of loyalty. This one's pretty simple. You must always act in the best interest of the parish, not in your own best interest. What is in the best interest of the parish? You must subjugate your own best interest to that of the parish. Secondly, you must make all decisions objectively. That means you have to recuse yourself. That means take yourself out of a voting or consideration process when that applies. Easy example. There's a vote coming up on who the church is going to hire to build the new expansion on the church. It just so happens that your cubado or your cousin is one of the parties that has a contract that's being considered. You cannot participate in the discussion, and you absolutely cannot participate in the decision. You must completely remove yourself from the process. If you do not, you have violated your legal duty of loyalty. And then thirdly, in those instances when confidentiality is required by the law, usually it's personnel matters or some very confidential parish matters. Very few of those fall into that bucket. You must respect confidentiality in that regard. Most things must be transparent, but there's certain circumstances that you're required to keep confidential, and you must do that. Otherwise, you're violating your duty of loyalty. Now we get to obedience. This is pretty simple. You got to follow your parish charters, articles, bylaws, governing documents, the regulations of the archdiocese, all your federal state laws, any of the policies that are created by your metropolis or the archdiocese. And I add to that making all your decisions in accordance and consistent with your parish's why, core values, and mission. Few best practices. Comprehensive parish ministry operations training manual. Go back to what I said before about leadership. The reason why the Florida parishes, some of the Texas parishes, and some of the California parishes didn't panic during COVID was because they're used to having been closed during natural disasters, and they had manuals that talked about every element they do. Every ministry should have a manual that describes what you do and how you do it. If you look at it, my entire dissertation book, all 626 pages of it, is me documenting best practices in leadership, stewardship and engagement, spiritual formation. You must have these documents. Secondly, you must apply best financial practices. 2 signatories for everything. Separation of authorities. Have the PC, the parish council, have financial oversight, use dashboards, have annual audits. Best if you have an independent audit. If you can't afford it, you have to have internal audits that are done by professionals. Thirdly, and I can't emphasize this enough, in fact, shortly you're going to get a letter from the Archdiocese underscoring this in greater detail. Actually, we talked about it in the Archdiocesan Legal Committee call today. You must ensure that your parish has full insurance coverages. Can't emphasize a couple things on here enough. Number one, get professional advice on this. If you don't have somebody in your community that is an insurance expert, then go out and bring one in. They don't charge. It comes out of the premiums in the policy. You have to have comprehensive policies that cover all of these elements in there. Cover your directors and officers. That's really to cover your hide. You need to have health and medical coverage for your employees and workers' compensation. You need youth protection insurance. Whenever there is, God forbid, a youth protection claim that comes up, first thing we look for is for the parish policy. Obviously, you're going to have a general liability, property, slips and falls, property and casualty. If you have special events, you should consider buying a special event rider. You should have financial integrity insurance. God forbid somebody should steal from you. And you should also look at having an excess umbrella coverage and cyber insurance coverage so that you have a full totality. Now, one other thing there that I got to make a point of. You must include the Archdiocese and your metropolis as an additional insured on all your policies. Go back to your carrier and say, I want you to add my metropolis and my archdiocese as an additional insured. It will cost you nothing more. It's free. They include that in there. You just got to tell them. And that way, when something happens that goes bad, the plaintiff's lawyers always sue the parish and the metropolis and the archdiocese. We have one insurance policy that you've got. It will automatically cover everybody. But in order for that to happen, you're required to add the metropolis and the archdiocese as additional insureds. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. You just got to tell your carrier to do that. You have to have required confidential conflicts of interest policies and disclosures. And you must do background checks for everyone, all your parish council members, all your ministry leaders. And this is the point in time where I'm going to take a short break here and take a sip of coffee and introduce Rhea Ballas, who is our expert from the Archdiocese that Father Ted introduced and is responsible for so many of these things. And she's going to talk particularly about the youth protection components, which is another one of these legal duties and responsibilities. Rhea, take it over from here. If
I'm
you're muted,
unmuted. Sorry,
there
I
you go.
started talking, being muted. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And it was very educational. It was good to hear about the insurance aspect. And I'll tell you a little bit more from what I am seeing. Look, you all know, you've heard from Father Ted that you need to be registered. You need to complete your background check if you're on parish council. The site youthsafetyplatform.goarch.org. And we have, as Father introduced, Nick DeFoulis And we have Nick, who is in your Metropolis, and if you need any additional assistance, here are the two emails. And I've got to get my screen to change. Okay. So the most important thing right now would be to explain to you what is compliance, because we need to work on that. And we need to work on that because our insurance carriers are asking to see that we have our people registered, and even our leadership. Not only are our leadership background checked, but are the leadership themselves, meaning you all, are they trained? Have they been acclimated to know what to see, what to look out for in the parish? Registering yearly, there is a code of conduct. Screening is every 2 years, and training. Best practice would be for you to take the training, for you to understand what's expected of all your ministry leaders. Our parishes all you as council members need to appoint a paisa. Usually the parish council president does that with the parish priest. Many of our parishes that are very successful, or the larger parishes, have more than one paisa who works with all the ministry leaders to confirm that they have everybody registered, screened, and trained. Successful parishes ask for ministry reports from youth safety. They present that at the council meeting. You all know that everybody's compliant or not compliant by that. And then also putting that out in your ministry handbook, as Bill said, let your parish know that this is a priority. It's not something that takes a back seat. So everyone in the parish is on board to understand that we need to make it a goal to oversee the safety of all of our ministries, protect our children, and that's really it. I thank you for your time. If there are any specific questions, you can email me at rballis@goarch.org, and I'd be happy to help you with that. But please, we've got to work on it. We've got a lot of parishes in this metropolis who maybe have, say, 20 some people registered and screened. And then when you look at it, they're only the parish council members. It's not all of the ministries that are included. We've got to do better. So please make this your goal in 2026 to get compliant with your parish and safeguard them. Thank you.
Bill, before you take it back,
Please.
Rhea, I just wanted to thank Rhea, all of you, on the Metropolitan's behalf and on all of our parts. She's incredible. She's a great asset. Any problems or struggles that you may have, Rhea is always available to help. And as she said, Nick DeFoulis, who's on our ministry team, both at the Metropolis and at the camp, is keeping an eye on it with me through our office at the Metropolis. So we are here to help and to assist. To be clear, every single parish council member must be compliant, and the parish council and our clergy have the responsibility to make sure all those who work with the young people in the parishes, anyone who has contact with youth in the parish, has to be compliant through the youth safety platform. Thank you, Rhea. Thank you, Nick. Bill, it's all yours.
Yeah, and I just want to double down on that for just a second. I'm taking my legal. You can see the 5 dysfunctions of the team slide, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
we made the switch. All right, but before I get to that, I want to cover one thing. We spent the entire time on our archdiocesan legal call today focusing on these issues and a variety of legal cases that have been filed against parishes, metropolises, archdioceses, etc., all related to this issue. The only issues we seem to have are in this area. And what we can tell, what we can go back and realize is if we are not diligent, if we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, then we will not be avoiding this problem in the future. Now, I don't want to get any further on it. I don't want to disclose any confidences. Regrettably, there are likely going to be some visible trials that take place next year because things have taken a long time to work their way through the court system. We're trying to work through it. But I cannot emphasize enough and beg you enough. You got to be compliant with all of the youth safety protection issues. Look, not because you have to, but because you should want to for the benefit and safety of our children and your grandchildren, your godchildren, and even the children you don't know. This would be something you should want to do. But I'm telling you now, as Ria did say, we've got to do it as a legal compliance matter. And this is the vehicle that's been established, and it works. And I will tell you, when we've been able to have issues come up, and we've had one of these in place, we haven't had any issues, knock on wood. So please do that. Okay.
Bill,
Yeah.
before you dive into the 5 dysfunctions of a team, could we catch up on a couple questions and comments?
No, can you hang on for a second? I know
Of
we want to
course.
get to it. I know we want to get to it, but I'm going to skip through something because I want to get to something else here. Okay.
Your call.
So no, I appreciate that, because I've been looking at the watch. I'm mindful of the time too. I actually went through, Ria, I hope you don't mind. I've heard your wonderful pitch, so I was actually looking at some of the questions and comments while we were going on. So I think I may know where you're going, Don. So keep those in mind. I'm not going to cover this in any detail, in part because we've discussed this before, and in part because this is a book every leadership team needs to read. But I wanted to just underscore what the 5 dysfunctions team, well-researched tool that has actually been used by some of the best organizations to identify dysfunctional teams. And I'm just going to quickly summarize them here. The deck is available to you. You can look at it later, but this is kind of a review of something we've covered previously, which is why I'm not going in great length. If we don't have trust, the team will break down, and ego is the number one killer. Secondly, this is something we haven't talked about before. I'm going to cover now. You cannot be afraid to have some conflict, not mean-spirited, not antagonism, but really debate and discussion about, are we doing the right thing? This is how we build a consensus around it. Lencioni has a little chart that he draws up where he shows, the boards and leadership teams that are completely irrelevant are the ones all the way on the left where everyone just nods their head and goes along, and there's no disagreement or discussion. That's dysfunctional. The one on the other extreme is clearly dysfunctional, when people start fussing at each other and being mean-spirited at each other and not working together. But there's a spot in the middle where you can have conflict, where you can have disagreement, where you can move the ball forward and work through how to get to a consensus on what you want to do. So don't fear conflict. And that gets back to one of the things we talked about before. You got to ask your questions. That's one of the duties you carry legally. The third one is a lack of commitment. And this is what happens when you don't build a consensus on what you're trying to accomplish. If you haven't had that ability to discuss, debate, and come to an agreement, and then walk out of that meeting unified that we are all on board with this decision, then what's going to happen is they're going to walk out of the meeting, and this group's going to say, oh, I don't agree with that decision. You don't have to do that. And this ministry is going to go off in that direction. And we see this all the time. You can disagree during the meeting, revise what needs to be revised, reach a unified consensus, and then everybody leaves the meeting committed to the objective. Fourthly, another dysfunction of a team is not being accountable for the results. You have to be accountable. That's where we talk about the transparency of, this is what we said we're going to do. This is what we did. This is where we achieved what we said. Here's where we fell short, and here's how we're going to fix that. That is an integral part of being accountable. And one of the ways you do that is by having a scoreboard and showing results. When I gave you that financial dashboard, that is an accountability tool. So if all of a sudden now we're running short on one of the numbers or something's going wrong, that's a signal that we're being accountable, we're being transparent, we have something to do, and now we're going to respond. So we have to have scoreboards that keep track of this. Ria's got a scoreboard that shows, Father Ted has a scoreboard that shows who's in compliance, who's not in compliance. We need to do this with all of the serious material things we're doing in our parish. That's a critical part of that. Now, this is not a part I'm going to cover at all in any detail. I just want to share it because we've talked about this to you all probably 4 or 5 different times. Don's available to reinforce this. Alex is available to reinforce that. Heck, I'm available to reinforce this. We want you to be focused on creating a strategic plan or some version of that at every one of your parishes. The book of Proverbs reminds us that if we don't cast a vision, the people will perish. Moses cast a vision of the promised land, and the people were willing to deal with 40 years of travails to get there. Peter Drucker, the guru of management, kept saying the best way to predict the future is to create it. Listen, I know your parish has challenges and issues, or your Metropolis parish has challenges and issues, but what's the future you want? Cast a vision for that parish and then build a systematic plan that will allow you to achieve it. And the way we do that is by asking these 4 questions. Why do we exist? Where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how are we going to get there? And the strategic planning process that we've developed in the Metropolis of Boston, that the TCI program has been instituting, that Don and Alex and others, and I'm available also, have been helping you through, will deliver 10 deliverable results that will help create that strategy and vision. Now, not every parish may be ready yet to go through a full-blown strategic planning process, but don't forget to start asking some of these questions. Every parish can do a why discovery, and we will help you do that. You don't have to do this by yourself. It's covered in my book, but we have the resources to help you do that. That's part of the commitment the Metropolis has made to you. And believe it or not, the Lily is so impressed with the work the Metropolis of Boston has done. That's why they re-up their commitment to you. That should be an endorsement, if nothing else, that this independent organization that's putting their money where their mouth is says the Metropolis of Boston is on the right track. We can help you get there, okay? And the way we do that is by focusing on the few things that can change everything, the root causes. If you're interested in learning more, and you're the kind of person that would rather read than talk to Don or Alex or me or Father Ted, Chapter 7 of my book is devoted to a comprehensive program for strategic planning. And the way you can tell is it's almost 100 pages. It's 98 pages long. But in there includes all the sample forms and documents. Literally, if you wanted to, you could take that and go chapter and verse down the list and go on and do what you want to do. Okay, we'll end with a little fun thing and then we're going to go to questions, okay? So give me one more second, Doc. Can I have a little bit of fun with everybody? I want to cover AI can be A-OK. Now, I know when I start talking about artificial intelligence, some of you are starting to be fearful. Some of you have these apocalyptic views. Some of you have seen a little bit of too many sci-fi movies. Everybody's a little bit concerned about what the future is going to hold, and there's some legitimacy in there. But I just want to show you a little bit of a little data here to get you inspired. Let's see if you can spot the trend, okay? This shows the percentage of U.S. households that embraced various technologies over time. The time is on the x-axis. So look at the line of adoption. Here's electricity, right? From the day it was invented, boom, it went straight up. Here's the automobile. Had a little bit of a decline during the Depression, then it went back straight up. Here's radio, through the roof. Here's color TVs, through the roof. Here's cell phones, straight up through the roof. Here's the internet, straight up through the roof. Here's the current one that's just come out now, crypto and digital assets and artificial intelligence. We've just started that craze. Where do you think that trend line is going to go? Do you think it's going to be any different than electricity, cell phones, automobiles, color TVs, internet, radio? I would tell you it is not. Now, I'm going to be very clear. The previous content is for entertainment and informational purposes, not for tax or constitute investment, financial advice, or legal advice. Nothing is material. So you've heard those disclaimers where the financial people come. I'm not telling you to go invest in cryptocurrency and to take all your church savings and go to Vegas and doing it. What I am telling you is this is what the future looks like. And I'm going to show you in a couple of different assets. I'm going to give you one example. Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the greatest futurists that has an accurate prediction of the future that is proven over and over again. He was the futurist that started Google. He's a co-founder of Singularity University. He works hand in glove with one of our Greek brothers, Peter Diamandis. And he famously said that in the next 10 years, we will experience as many changes as humanity has seen during the past century. And just think about that for a second, right? That's the change that we're getting ready to go. And a precursor of proof of that is in a great piece of research that was done back on this book I talked about, Mastering Leadership. They asked over 1,500 CEOs, profits, nonprofits, everybody, what are the challenges that you see in the future? And there were two that came up to the top, and they were escalating complexity and building the creative capacity in leadership to deal with it. This is where your parish is. Now, I got to share with you a personal story, and this is going to be true for those of you of a certain age. When I first started practicing law right after electricity was invented, there were no computers, there was no internet, there were no cell phones. Blessedly, there was no such thing as called email. There were no fax machines. We did it the old-fashioned way. I was like Yaya over here, okay? That was the way we started practicing. And as it was coming out, I was leading our technology and intellectual property practice at the firm. And all of a sudden in the early 80s, I started seeing all of the things coming. And I went to my partners and I said, the world is going to change. The practice of law is going to change. And we either going to get on board or we're going to get left behind. And I never thought in my life that I would ever again see something as absolutely transformational as the internet and computers and cell phones were in my life. I thought you do it once in your lifetime and that's it. And I'm telling you, my brothers and sisters, I have lived long enough to see it happen again. Artificial intelligence is going to make everything we have seen in the form of technology and transformation obsolete, or I should say, reimagined. Now, you're going to come at it with all these dystopian fears and see these robots that are going to take over humanity. And yeah, we got some work to do in that regard. But I want to do some challenging right here. I'm going to challenge you to think about how we could use artificial intelligence within our churches and within our parishes. Now, those that have known and worked with me on strategic plans know that I've gone down the rabbit hole enough to realize that when we would take a parish through a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and we get everybody to give us their feedback, and then we would have to organize it. We call it heat mapping. It could take me 3 to 4 days to heat map all of those results. I spent a day developing an artificial intelligence agent, an AI agent, that could take all that raw data and analyze it for me and give and spit out results. Now, it's never perfect. I still have to go through it and manually look at it, but I've now got it to where I can take 4 days of work and I've reduced it to 3 hours of my time by using our artificial intelligence agent. I'm not relying on it completely. I'm second guessing it. Okay, so let's talk about, let me just throw out some ideas of ways that you might consider using artificial intelligence in your parishes. How about in your media and your newsletters? You can use artificial intelligence to help you create media captions or short religious content devotionals. Now look, you got to vet it. You got to make sure it's not hallucinating. You got to make sure it didn't pick up from some Protestant denomination. But it can give you a first draft in seconds of what it might take you weeks to actually do. You can actually create your own, it will create the first draft of emails or bulletins or announcements for you. When I get ready to send out a letter, I send it to 2 AI tools and I say, improve this letter. And it always comes back better. Secondly, you could repurpose sermons. So think about this, clergy. Take your sermons, upload it to AI, and say, now take this entire sermon and break it up into 3 different parts or 5 different parts, or however many different points you made in it, and produce shorter videos that we can put up on our website, on our YouTube place, et cetera, et cetera. We can do shorts. We can do things like, it's taking your content. You created it. But now let's reuse it, and let's reuse it in many different ways. We all know that everybody has a short attention span. We now know that's the reason why Facebook and Instagram Reels are some of the most addictive things in the universe. So take your 15 or 30-minute homily and let AI help you break your homily, not change anything, break your homily down into bite-sized pieces. How about welcoming visitors? Do you know the number one way people find new churches is by looking at your website? Have AI develop your website, have AI evaluate your website. In fact, have 3 different AI tools evaluate your website. How about adding a chat bot in there that can answer questions that maybe you didn't answer on your homepage, like when are your services? Where do I park? Are there children's programs? I will tell you that if you use artificial intelligence, I'm going to put my legal hat on for a second. If you use artificial intelligence with a chat bot, you're required to notify the user that artificial intelligence is responding, okay? But let it do some of the heavy lifting that doesn't require the personal interactive time that you want. Let it create a 3-dimensional walkthrough. I misspelled 3-dimensional, a walkthrough of your church. Let it translate the work for you. Do you know that you can speak your words and it'll simultaneously translate it into any language that you want with amazing accuracy? Or if you have it in Greek and you want to translate it in English, let it do the first pass. Yes, you should look at it, but it can do a lot of the work for you. It can create written explanations. How about administrative efficiency? This is the easy way. Volunteer coordination should not require all the time that it takes you to do it anymore. You can do everything from managing mailing lists to sending automated reminders to even finding replacements, all with artificial intelligence. Data analysis. You don't have to do all the data crunching anymore. You can create an AI agent that will do it for you and allow you to accelerate things. And drafting first drafts or revising drafts. And here's my big challenge. I am looking for someone to develop an orthodox AI large language model. That's what an LLM is. I want the Orthodox Information Synthesis. Okay. I want somebody to create an AI tool that just has consumed all of the approved Orthodox content that we can now go to with our Orthodox questions rather than putting it out there. So that's my wish list. That's my dream list. What I want you to take away from this is that there has never been a more exciting time to be alive than now. And as a church leader, it's incumbent upon you to consider how you can do this. And I want to share with you one thing just for kicks and giggles. Hopefully this will work. Just listen to this song. I went to an artificial intelligence tool and I said, read Romans 8 and create for me a piece of music that would teach the message of Romans 8. And this is what it came up with. It took me longer to describe it than it took me to write it. Hopefully this will play. There's no choir singing this. This was all created by artificial intelligence.
In him our fear shall fade away, like shadows at the break of day. All trials come but never stay, they vanish with the morning rain.
By the way, it's showing me closed captions on this. I'm going to cut it off short.
We're not hearing it right now, Bill. Are you expecting
Did
us to
it
hear
cut off? Yeah, did it cut off?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think,
All right.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to stop it right there. The point of what I'm saying is literally in one sentence, I had it produce something that sounded like a symphonic orchestra. Now, let's imagine if we did something orthodox with that. Let's imagine that we asked it to bring together Byzantine chant. Let's imagine if we asked it to take one of our services and really do something with it. Folks, this is what's available to you. You can say no to it, and that's fine, but we're going to be left behind. We were ultimately called to bring, not just to lead the parish, but to bring people closer to Christ and each other. And His Eminence specifically is inviting you to bring people so that they can follow their Ephesians 4:1 job of walking worthy of the calling to which they are called, so they can answer their 2 Corinthians 5:10 moment when they stand before the Lord and seek a good account before the awesome judgment seat of Christ. I'm going to end with a suggested reading list for those that want to read it. 5 books on leadership, 1 on church growth, 1 on starting with why, and 3 on operational effectiveness. One of them is, and this whole deck is available to you. I'm going to give it to you the link in a second. This is the entire book. So if you want more on the leadership chapters, you can go there. You can click on that QR code and it'll take you there. This deck is already up on the page that I've set up for leadership for your Metropolis under my website. That QR code will take you there. So if you're interested in downloading this presentation, I have just this one slide with your QR code. And now we're going to have a few Q&A. Take it away, Brother Don.
All right. So fantastic, Bill. I think one of the jobs of leaders is to create other leaders. And you certainly do that every time you speak to us. So we appreciate you very much doing this. So one of the questions is from Costas about reading GA minutes at the GA meeting. Is that required? Is it required to read out loud last year's minutes?
Only if you want no one to show up and everybody to tune out.
I think that was his point exactly.
Costa, you got it right. Folks, send out, remember what we said for the parish council? Same rule applies for the General Assembly. Send out the minutes of the General Assembly. Have a copy of it on the table. All you need is a motion to adopt listen if there's any changes, and then approve it. That literally should take about, assuming the minutes are right, it should take about 10 seconds.
There were a couple of comments from James earlier. One was you need to get buy-in to the mission and vision. Would you like to elaborate on that or expand on
Yeah,
that at all?
1,000%. There is no, I was talking to a priest once who was frustrated that nobody was coming on board. And so he said, I created a strategic plan for the parish. And I said, congratulations, you've created your strategic plan, but it's not a strategic plan for the parish. So unless and until, and this is where that consensus process comes in, and this is why if you go back to the slides on strategic planning, we build a process that includes a broad cross-section of the community to come together to help create a vision and a strategy and a why, and then we populate it within the parish and we adapt it as need be. One of the great Kuzis quotes that I love so much, I didn't include it in this deck, is that leaders don't describe who is a leader, followers do. And he says, if you think you're a leader and you turn around and no one's following you, congratulations, you're simply out for a walk. And that's what happens if you don't build a consensus around the vision, the why, and the strategy. And that's the process that the Metropolis of Boston started through the TCI program in multiple parishes. That's the process that we do. We will help you do that if you're not able to do that. But whoever said that is 100% right. Make this a process that can really engage the entire parish so that they can capture the vision, they can understand it, they can buy into the why, and now all of a sudden, everybody will move forward.
Perfect, 100%. James also shared that being a humble leader enables others to speak up and contribute.
Oh, that is so right. I mean, and everyone practices humility in different ways. I mean, I like to use deprivation. I always make fun of lawyers and make fun of myself and whatnot. Other people do it different ways, but recognize one thing: you are never going to be the smartest person in the world. And if you gather a group of people together, all of you will be smarter than any one of you will be together. And all of you can do more than any one of you can do by yourself. And the first time you recognize that, there was one perfect human being that ever existed, and we crucified him. All the rest of us are flawed and fallen human beings that are subject to our own biases, our own prejudices, our own experiences, and all of the limitations that life brings upon us. So the smartest people I have ever seen and the smartest leaders I have ever seen, including I've seen in the business world and the nonprofit world, you know what they told me their first objective was? Is to surround themselves with people smarter than them. The minute they were the smartest person in the room, they realized they were in the wrong room. And they needed to surround themselves with people smarter and more capable than they were. And that's really the sign of an excellent leader. That's also a practicing of great humility.
Yeah, perfect. Love it, Bill. Thank you. Costas asked a question about the Council of Ministries. Should a PC board member who serves as a liaison with a ministry participate actively on that ministry meeting? For example, Philopticus.
Yes. So we want our parish council members to be active in the ministry, but not necessarily leading the ministry. In other words, we're not trying to double up the responsibilities of the parish council, right? But yes, they need to be engaged, they need to participate, they need to be involved on it so that when they show up at the parish council meeting, because remember, we're converting the entire parish council meeting. Parish council meeting is now focused on the strategy in the future of where we're going and what are our ministries doing to achieve that. They have to speak with integrity and they have to speak with authority. And the only way they can do it is if they've been a part of the ministry. So yes, get in there and be a part of it. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be responsible for everything, but you can't just ask them to send you a report and then report on it. You don't have the credibility to represent that ministry if you're not engaged in that ministry. By the way, it's also a way, think about this, it's also a way for you to be recruiting other people to be leaders that will ultimately be leaders on the parish council and in other ministries. So it's your humility, it's your learning, it's your experiencing, but you're transforming the parish council to make it focused on the ministry work. Good job, Costa. You're 2 for 2, buddy.
Perfect. All right. Alexis has an idea. She says, this is a really great presentation. Is there a cheat sheet for PC that PC presidents can use summarizing this to present to their new PC in January to set the tone for the year?
So if you're talking about a cheat sheet for the presentation, The answer is no. But if I were you, Alexis, I would take this presentation deck that you can download from the website, submit it to 2 or 3 AI tools, and say, summarize this and create a simple short thing that we can do with this. I'm going to challenge you to do what I challenge everybody else to do. I can do this, and I will do it because it's actually a pretty good idea, Alexis. But I want you guys to do it. And that's just an example of the way I try to do things, right? I will frequently take an article I wrote or a chapter I wrote or a video that I did and send it to AI and say, make it more accessible, make it simpler, make it summarize it, give me the key points of this thing. And now you still have to look at it. You'll still have to judge it. And when it relates to the question you ask, you may have to jockey some things around. In other words, there may be some things that are irrelevant to your parish. Like if you already have a council of ministries, you can skip that. If you're confident that your parish council is locked and loaded on what Rhea talked about, what we talked about in meeting all your duties, then you can skip that part of it. I would probably emphasize more the servant leadership part. I think that's the part that I would emphasize more. And for that, I have created a cheat sheet. That's that test that I gave you. And there's a cross link in my book that explains those elements of servant leadership. So reading assignment, if you want to, you can go read that small section of the book and deal with it from there. Great question, Alexis.
Good. I think we're at the end of the questions. I think it may be worth putting up your link one more time to this presentation.
Yep.
Because it went by fairly quick. I wasn't able to grab it. So people can get it. And while you're doing that, there is another question that came in from St. Sophia in New London. How to make GAs more inviting when there are some fixed items that we have to decide, like budget, bylaws, etc.
Okay. So here's the link to the presentation for anybody who wants to hit it on the QR code and stuff like that. And then what we'll do is we have this audio recording here, and we will fix that 100 issue. I don't know what's going on with that. We'll fix that up. But this deck is available. We will also upload the audio there. And I'm sure the Metropolis of Boston, as it has routinely done on the TCI site, will take the presentation deck and we'll also take the video, and that will be available to you and stuff like that. All right. So now let's switch over to the GA question. And I said I wasn't going to answer it because I wanted you all to answer it. But I'm going to give you some suggestions on what you said. Okay. So let's take the 2 items that you mentioned. If you have a budget, let me say it differently. You must have a budget. That's required, right? When you have your budget, you should circulate that budget like a week in advance of the General Assembly meeting. You should have a FAQ, frequently asked questions about the budget, anticipate what are the most likely questions you're going to get, and answer them. Just put it together in a document. It's real easy to do, a sentence or 2 describing it, and you'll be surprised how many questions you're going to resolve in advance. Send that to every parishioner in advance. Send it to everybody in advance. And then at the General Assembly meeting, all you're going to do is take a synthesis of that. And you're not going to go line item by line because they've already gotten it. They've already got the financial statements. In fact, if you're doing it right, your financial statements are up on your website. Yes, I did say that. Your entire P&L should be up on your website. Your balance sheet should be up on your website. And that dashboard that I gave you that's taking those 7 most important pieces of information and updating it should be up on your website. If you want to end any arguments about transparency and integrity and accountability in your parish, put your financials on the website and just tell people to go look at it. But back to the budget question. You've created the budget. You've sent it out in advance. You've added the FAQs, the frequently asked questions on it. Then when you get to the section on the General Assembly meeting, it's a short summary of just the top line items. Here's how much we're budgeting for stewardship. Here's how much we're budgeting for our total income. Here's how much we're budgeting for total expenses. And if there's a big item, like if you're in the middle of a capital campaign, maybe you feature that. You've already had the budget now for a week. You've had the FAQs. Are there any questions? Now, you just noticed my presentation was about 10 seconds long. And that's about all the presentation needs to be, because you're letting that work be done in advance. Now, you're going to get some questions, and somebody you're going to want to go by line items, okay? But you will promise you, if you send out the budget in advance, and if you send out the FAQs, the frequently asked questions in advance, and you do the summary of just the 4 or 5 key data points that you want, that are critical for them to understand, then you're not going to get a whole lot of discussion. Now, I'll add one little footnote on that. This is bias, but there's an agenda behind this. The one thing I would feature in your presentation of the budget are the dollars you're going to spend on ministries and philanthropies. I would hyper focus on that. I'd spend no time on all the other expenses unless there's an anomaly or something that needs approval, but I'd spend no time on that. I'd spend the amount of time on what are we spending on ministries and philanthropy. The reason is because that's the reason why churches exist on the operational side. There's a selfish reason. The data shows that parishes that have both an external focus and an internal focus will generate 3 to 4 times the funds of those that only have an internal focus. So as you start to focus people's attention on the ministries and philanthropies and the global impact we're having in the church, that's going to get them excited. Okay. Yes. Occasionally there is something else that you need to get approved, but again, same protocol. Send it out in advance. Have open forum sessions. I'll give you a small example of that. There's a parish that I took through strategic planning. They're building a new church. That's a pretty controversial issue. They had multiple information sessions before the General Assembly meeting where they answered everyone's questions. They put out the documents well in advance, multiple times. They had an FAQ section. They had a section up on their website. They had a place where you can ask questions in advance and they'd get answered. By the time it came time for the General Assembly meeting, and trust me, this is a rarity, 100% approval, including 100% approval to borrow some money to go in a little bit of debt. But they had been so over communicated with the information about it so many times, open forums, open presentations, open transparency, that even the serial arsonists had nothing to do. Now they may show up and they may raise an issue or two, but it all gets back to that pre-meeting work and open transparency and integrity in everything you do. And then you'll go through the business of the meeting quickly. But what I would do is I'd flip the script on the GA, just like we flipped the script on the parish council meeting. I'd start with the strategy, the future, the vision, the ministries. That's what I would start with. And then you do the ministerial stuff towards the end. And there's a lot more to that strategy that I want you all to think about based on what we talked about. But the first thing I tell you is conduct a survey, however you want to do it, of all the people that are not coming to your General Assembly meeting and ask them a bunch of questions about what would it take for them to come to a General Assembly meeting. And after they will smartly and they'll say nothing, I'll never come to one again. Say, no, seriously. If you were designing a General Assembly meeting that would be interesting to you, what would be on it? And get them to tell you, and then listen, and then follow up. Other questions?
Awesome. Do churches regularly do anonymous surveys?
Yes. Good ones do. The best in class ones do. But if you ask me, do Orthodox churches do? The answer is no. But the best ones do. Now, you got to be careful not to overdo it, right? Because you don't want to get what they call survey fatigue. But on average, there's no perfect data on this, right? Or at least that I'm aware of. But on average, if you survey your congregation no more than once a year, you're not going to suffer from donor fatigue. And what you survey, so for example, one of the tools that we have that's available to you that many of the parishes of the Metropolis of Boston have used is the Effective Parish Assessment Tool. It's an anonymous survey that asks the parishioners to rate, to identify, to answer questions. It's now been completely revised, by the way, and we're now pleased to offer EPA version 3.0 that's more simple, more direct, and been validated empirically now with our survey. But it's a simple survey, takes about 10 minutes now to complete, and it will give you some of the most incredible information about what your parishioners think. That's an example of a tool you can use. There are other survey tools out there that you may come up with that are unique to your parish. So for example, if you're getting ready to think about a new church or a new building, then that you should really focus on going through a process by which you ask your parishioners to tell you what they want in the new church. What do they need in the new church? But yes, the best in class parishes will always do surveys of their congregations.
Awesome. And you have to act on them and communicate the results. Otherwise, people aren't going to pay attention anymore.
100%. Can't emphasize that enough. If you ask people, then you've got to respond to them and let them know what they told you, And then you got to show that you listen to what they said and you got to do something about it. Now, you may not be able to do everything about everything that they came up with. One of the reasons why we love doing the SWOT analysis and then heat mapping it is people will see that something that's very important to them, only one other parishioner in the parish thought that was important. And yet there's 700 parishioners or 700 thoughts on this subject. So going through these surveys actually helps you lead and manage to help people understand when what they're focused on is most important, may not be most important. But Don hit it right on the head. Ask, show that you listen by reporting back, and then show that you listen by acting on it. You make a change as a result of that. 100%.
Bill, thank you again for your insights and your expertise and your knowledge in this space. We love it. Lots of positive comments about how great this presentation was.
Glory to God.
Thank you for that. And Father Ted, would you
Yes.
like to chime in, or are we
Yes.
Yes, go ahead,
Thank you
Father
so
Ted.
much. Everyone, before we turn it over to Father Tom for a closing prayer and a word, Bill, thank you. It was phenomenal.
Glory to
The whole
God.
team, everyone who's here, thank you. I just sent a note out to the clergy. So those of you who are on, please take this message to your parish council friends. We had a technical difficulty tonight. It capped out at 100. It shouldn't have. We are figuring that out. My phone blew up the whole night with people waiting to get in. So I sent a note apologizing. Please invite them all to come Monday. We will have resolved this issue by then. And if some people who waited tonight couldn't get in, can't be there Monday, then with the priest, I'm working it out that they'll take this video and they'll do it privately at the parish. My sincere apologies for that. And Bill, before I
Mine too, because that should not have happened.
It all falls on me. I'm the one that said
no. I own that one.
Bill, before I give it to Father Tom, you know the most exciting thing I'm walking away with tonight's presentation is?
What's that? Your
AI assistant that saved you 4 days into 2 hours or 3 hours. That tells me that you're now available to us for like three more days a week to do Boston ministry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that.
You have no idea how much easier your life can be if you let AI take over the.
But we get you more. That's my point. We'll have you more on our team.
Listen, man, all you got to do is ask, and you know the answer is yes. So
God bless you, Bill. Father Tom, please close us out.
We thank you, O Lord, for bringing us together this evening. We ask that you continue to strengthen and bless your servant, Bill, who has provided the wisdom you have shown him and shared it with us. We ask that you strengthen our ministries within our communities, that you allow us to be the good servant leaders that will lead our communities to your glory, now and ever, into the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen.
Good night, everybody. Have a blessed Advent season. Merry Christmas.
If I don't see the rest of y'all, have a Merry Christmas. God bless you all.
Good night. Thank you.